The only thing about a first impression you got to worry about is that you make a bad first impression, because then that becomes your last impression, because the other side is so fed up with you, they don't want talking.
Welcome to the 300th episode of the Game Changing Attorney Podcast. Today, we'll be looking back at some of our most memorable guests, behind-the-scenes stories, and much, much more.
You can get away with a mediocre first impression. The other side's going to give you some rope. You can't get away with a bad first impression. And then immediately, whatever the last impression is, it colors the rest of the interaction.
I'm Michael Mogul, founder and CEO of Crisp, the nation's #1 law firm growth company. I've built my business through practice, not theory. Crisp started with just $500 to my name and has grown to over 8 figures in revenue over the last few years, earning a spot on the Inc. 500 list of the fastest growing private companies in America. Our approach has been to take everything we've learned about generating massive growth within our own organization and help the country's most ambitious and committed law firm owners do the same for theirs. In each episode of this podcast, I sit down with innovative market leaders from the legal industry and beyond to learn from those who thrive in the face of adversity, challenge the status quo, and define what it means to be a true game changer. From episode 1 to episode 299, this episode, number 300, features insights and stories from our most unforgettable guests to date.
The level of cash that I think most people should have should feel like it's too much. If it feels like it's excessive, then you at least have a fighting chance to deal with the risks that you cannot even envision.
That's coming up on the Game Changing Attorney Podcast. Before we begin today's episode, I want to remind you that we aren't beholden to any sponsors or run any ads on this podcast. This allows us to present all of our episodes raw and unfiltered. I'm not going to push any made-to-order meal services on you or try to save you any money on your car insurance. That being said, I have one small request. If you receive any value from this podcast, please give it a 5-star review. Pay the fee so we can keep this podcast free. The first guest in the very first episode of this podcast was John Morgan, founder and CEO of America's largest injury law firm. Interesting story on this one. So we're in Atlanta, and John was in Hawaii at the time, so we shipped him a podcast mic only to find out that he didn't have anything to plug it into. No computer, no laptop. And as it turned out, John was running his law firm at the time from his iPad. So we overnighted him a laptop to make this podcast happen, and during our conversation, John shared his thoughts on why you can't teach hungry and the differences between lions and sloths.
I believe that it goes back to life is luck. I believe I'm the way I was because I was born this way. Warren Buffett was born that way. He was a paper boy. I'll bet you were very entrepreneurial as a kid. I believe you had something going. Now, in my generation, we were all paper boys. The people who were paper boys were the guys, because I'll meet people, I go, "Hey, were you a paper boy?" They go, "Yeah, why?" I just wondered. Because I was born that way. I was born. And by the way, being a paper boy is hard. It's 7 days a week. It's rain, it's snow. I was in Kentucky, and you have to get up and you got to collect money. And sometimes they don't pay you money. When they didn't pay me money, I would go back and egg their houses later that night when they wouldn't pay me. But I was born that way. Some people are not born that way. And it doesn't matter rich or poor. Oprah was a paper girl. Christy Brinkley was a paper girl. Jack Welch was a paper boy. He was born that way. Warren Buffett calls it winning the ovarian lottery. And this goes back to life is luck. I'm lucky that I was born to be a paper boy, that I always wanted to have money and my own money. And so when I look at it all, I think it's genetic. And then I was born in America. And then life can be unlucky that turns out to be the best luck. I was in Kentucky. I love being in Kentucky. All my friends when I go back to Kentucky now, my Little League Tiger team all gets together and play. My Christ the King reunion's coming up, and we're going to have the thing at my son's bourbon bar in Lexington. But then I had to leave Kentucky because my dad lost his job, and I left everything, and I cried on the way to the airport. I got on my first ride, and I went to Florida, and then I realized, boy, we really are poor people because look where we're living. All of a sudden, you're like, holy shit, I am poor. I am desperate. But my dad bought a house in one section of town instead of the other, same exact house, but I was a better neighborhood. And then I got in that school district, and that school district made me better and smarter. And then I got to be around rich people, and I got to see what they were doing. And then I got to go to the University of Florida. But almost none of that luck had anything to do with me. And when you realize that, again, like I say, you quit patting yourself on the back and then just try to start getting a better return on luck.
So it's interesting you mentioned luck, and I certainly agree with you, but there's a part of this when you mentioned that phone call at 3 o'clock in the morning. A lot of this is also you're taking very, very committed action. I mean, in a way, it's almost like I would equate luck with gratitude, like realizing how much there is to be grateful for and then not wanting to squander any opportunity.
Well, that's right. You see, the name of that book that you got there, You Can't Teach Hungry. You can't. You can't teach hungry. It's just there. It's lucky. But the thing that irritates me about people is they'll say, well, by God, you got up out of the bed at 3 o'clock in the morning and you went and did it. By God, you did it. But I was built that way. They go, yeah, but you did it. You actually did the work. Well, yeah, but some people aren't capable of it. You say, well, yeah, they are. No, they're not. We're animals. We're no different than the animals in the jungle. In the jungle today, a lion will be born. And that lion is the king of the jungle just because he or she's a lion. The same day, a sloth will be born. Okay? Same day, same jungle, same deal. That sloth is so fucked, you can't even describe it because he's a sloth. All he can do is barely muster up enough energy to come down the tree, grab some berries, go to the bathroom, and go back up and go to sleep. There's two different mules. There's the hardworking mule and there's the stubborn mule. They're just built that they cannot get up. I'm lucky that I was a lion instead of the sloth, and I'm lucky that I got the genes to be the hardworking mule that'll get up in the snow. And by the way, once I got through with the paper route, I went and shoveled snow. I wasn't done. I didn't go by. I went to the Toddle house and got some bacon and eggs, but then I was back out shoveling snow because the day wasn't over. But that's how I was built. And so that gives you such a great advantage. And it's totally out. Shaquille O'Neal cannot be Shaquille if he's not 7'3". If he's built like me, he's like the fucking sloth. He's fucked.
You mentioned before we started that nothing was off limits. So I got to ask this question because this is an exercise I do to myself a lot. And it's if you were your own competitor, let's say like you start another law firm, you've got to compete against Morgan & Morgan. What could a competitor do to wipe you out?
I don't think anybody could wipe me out. I don't think anybody works harder than me. I don't think anybody has the imagination that I have. Look, there was nobody on the back of phone books until me. They were free. It used to be just a calendar. But before I went to law school, I sold Yellow Pages, and I thought, that'd be the place I'd rather be because that's a 50-50 chance of just being found right there. So I sort of bought up them. There was no lawyers on billboards until me. There was no lawyers on buses till me. There was no lawyers on... I don't think anybody could ever put me out of business. The only person who could put me out of business would be me by doing something stupid or crazy or just saying, hey, I'm done. People could put a gigantic dent in my business by doing some of the things I do, but they could never put me out of business. Only I could put myself out of business. I believe that at this writing, I'm the greatest legal marketer in the history of legal marketing. We're going to do almost $1 billion in fees this year. We spent $150 million in advertising. So to totally put me out of business would be hard. Only I can hurt myself.
Yeah, that's the right answer. I think we all get to a certain point and really it's you against you, and then being smart in terms of how we behave, how we manage our business, how we manage ourselves personally, because you're right. I mean, at that point, it is just you.
I am my own competition. And what I'm doing with my Google law firm is I'm bringing in all sorts of people and friends all over America. I mean, this firm in Boston, I probably send them 200, 300 cases a month. I send Sam Pond 200 or 300 cases a month. And I'm lucky because I've never thought of these lawyers as my competition. I've always thought of them as my friends and people who can make me better and ways for me to collaborate and do better with. I am my own competition. And when the drive is dead, when my drive is finally dead, that'll be the time that they have a chance to make inroads with me. But right now, I still want to increase. I still want to grow. I still want to do better.
In episode 47 of this podcast, I sat down with Jessica Mogul, seasoned business leader, head of coaching strategy at Crisp, and yes, she also happens to be my wife and the mother of our 2 amazing girls. So Jessica is someone who prefers to be behind the scenes at Crisp, so it took nearly a year of me convincing her to come on this podcast. But I think you'll agree it was worth the wait.
So whatever is established at your company, your firm, you've established that. If you are the CEO, if you are the owner, you have endorsed that. The other day I heard a great quote, you endorse what you tolerate. And if somebody is consistently late and you're like, oh, it's okay, you're endorsing that. And the rest of the team sees that. And the biggest thing, I really always focus on culture, people, processes, but your A players do not want to be around mediocre people. They just don't. It actually will deter them and push them away.
I find that ego plays a large role in driving any type of organizational change, because there was a time where I felt that the things that I wasn't good at, it was important for me to get good at them. I mean, there's business fundamentals, I think, across the board. Like, if you're going to grow any organization to any level of scale, you will need organizational processes, SOPs, KPIs, all these different things that are necessary for a business to grow and scale. Yet, if that's not something that is your strength, rather than focusing on how do I develop this weakness, lean into the things that you love and are your strengths, and instead find people like yourself.
Yeah. And I think it's also people, when I say people like myself, I'm a very, very structured person. Michael's not kidding. It took a very long time to get me on this podcast. So anything that's kind of outside of my norm, I really have to think about that. I have to process that. And what's interesting, though, is in this position, you have to be okay being uncomfortable. So especially you're working with a visionary CEO, you can't be entirely stuck in your ways. I actually remember when I say there were no processes, Michael at this time was making every single sale and 1-800 number rings. And I'm like, okay, well, what do you do? Like, how do we replicate this? And we didn't have an answer. So I made a process. And then I hand Michael this beautifully packaged up process. And I said, okay, great. So here's your process. You can do something and we can test it or something. And he goes, great. You're going to shift the 1-800 number to you and you're going to test the sales process. And I said, great. So that's how I learned to do sales at Crisp, was because I was pushed outside of my comfort zone. But I think that's really important because you can't really grow within the company without pushing yourself to those limits.
Yeah, I remember even the time where not only do we not have a hiring process, which, I mean, now it's amazing. We teach on the hiring process that we have now. We didn't have a formal onboarding or training and development process or even curriculum, any of those things. And I was getting frustrated. I'm like, why are these people not working out? And I mean, it's 100% my fault because, number one, we weren't vetting them properly on the front end because there was no hiring process. And then once they were hired, how are we training and developing them to be successful in their role? And there was no training and development structure. It's kind of ironic in the sense that everything we do now on the coaching side of the business, and we work with law firms, is based on all the lessons that we've learned. But what's so fascinating to me looking back is that I love business. I'm obsessed with it in the sense that I was reading the business books. I was going to the business conferences. I knew the importance of having these processes or these KPIs or formal onboarding or training and development. Like, I knew these things. You didn't have to convince me of them. And yet, despite reading all those books, you never really truly understand that the most important thing instead could be, from a leverage standpoint, how does this actually get done? We talk to law firms about this all the time. When we ask them, like, how many of you know, if you need systems and processes in your organization, every hand goes up. And then you ask, well, how many of you actually have clearly defined every single process in your organization? And like 1-2 hands go up, and then half of them are being dishonest. And at some point, learning more about what the process to create isn't going to help you create the process. And the reality is, you're never going to do it. Never, ever, ever, ever going to do it, prove me wrong. But instead, the shortcut is find somebody who loves processes and is operationally minded. And just, I'm sure there's going to be people listening to this that are wondering, okay, I've heard enough. Where do I find me a Jessica?
That's a great question. I've actually become, I think, what is that, a noun now? A Jessica, finding a Jessica. So again, I never planned to be here as long as I am. And honestly, I couldn't see myself doing anything else. But it's interesting when you say that about asking firm owners. I was talking to a client this morning and he has a workshop coming up. And I said, great, have you blocked out your day that you get back to sit down with your right hand and go through everything? And he's like, oh, let me do that right now. Because he knows he will go back and nothing will get done without this person who is going to actually execute. And so there will be an interesting transition in this conversation because we're also married. And so how do you find a Jessica? Oh, this could go on forever. So the interesting thing is of course, we trust each other immensely. So there's that side of things. And then you really have to find someone, though, again, like I said, they have to be okay being number two, being behind the scenes, being the operational person, and honestly, someone who is okay challenging you. I think that is a big thing that we've seen with a lot of people who come in from a leadership perspective is having that confidence to challenge you and that person, any visionary, because it's very easy for a visionary to say, oh, I've got all these ideas, let's run with them. And so I would say one of my biggest strengths, though, is actually being able to poke holes in things. And so being able to say, no, this is not good, or what if this happens? And I know all you visionaries are probably thinking, no, those people are going to slow me down. Those people are going to be so defensive and they're going to, not want to make any progress. And it is not defensiveness. I just look at every scenario that could go wrong before we implement. I'm not saying don't do it. I just want to have every potential, cage, barrier everywhere to protect it.
I will say this to our credit. I believe we've done a very good job of this over the years in the sense that at the office, unless you were explicitly told, and you learn that we are married, many times I think you can go weeks or months without knowing that, we're even together. And I think that stems from the fact that at the business and in the office, it's business.
100%. You are harder on me than any person here. And I think that it should be that way. I don't want special treatment. I don't think that I deserve special treatment. It is funny that you say that, especially when we were a lot smaller, also before I was a mogul, it was not so obvious, of course, that we were together. But a team, back when there were probably 10, 15 people, they actually filmed a video while Michael and I were on vacation and interviewed each person and asked how they found out that we were actually together. It was hilarious, the stories, though. People literally had no idea for months that we were together because that separation and that professionalism has to be there. That's something I've always been very wary about, too, having trained so many offices. If the significant other was, involved in the practice, I've seen it go both ways. And I have always made a very conscious effort to not just be, oh, well, that's Michael's wife and, she gets her way or anything. No, you're harder on me than any person here.
So I've seen this when people have, let's say they're in the business with their spouse. I've seen it have disastrous effects, like disastrous. I've seen relationships not only deteriorate, but end over it. It's not even just them, let's say, working together. Sometimes it's just you have the person, let's say the CEO of the firm, and then you've got the husband or wife that's at home. Let's say there's a different career path, but it's like them not knowing what they signed up for when you're in a relationship like that. And I've seen people try to make it work because, they'll hear about, well, let me bring my husband into the business, let me bring my wife into the business. I would say that, from the onset, I think look back even to the first date, because I remember we had this conversation. It was having complete clarity of like who I am and what you're signing up for and saying, hey, this is the out. Because the worst thing is to figure this out years later once you're married and have kids.
Oh, yeah. So I will say that is something from the very beginning. There are even times now when you spit out some crazy idea and you're like, are you cool with this? And literally my answer every time is, I know what I signed up for. So I know exactly how ambitious it's going to be, how crazy it's going to be. But that alignment from the very beginning could not be more important. And it's interesting too when you say that about, someone who maybe has a stay-at-home spouse, because that also can be very challenging. And that was one thing with us working together is like, we've never questioned late nights. We've never questioned how long, someone's going to be there. And it doesn't just work on one way. I mean, there are nights where you've gone home and I'm still at the office, but we've never like challenged that or been like, where are you? Or, we're in it together and we know where we're going.
In episode 72 of the podcast, I sat down with Mark Manson, New York Times best-selling author whose books have been translated into more than 60 languages and have sold over 13 million copies worldwide. His content can be described as self-help for people who hate self-help. And in fact, Mark believes that constantly striving for happiness in the face of life's challenges can be just as bad as being miserable all the time. And during our conversation, he shared some insights from his best-selling book, The Subtle Art of Not Giving a... Well, you can figure it out.
The title is a bit of a Trojan horse. It's like everybody's always stressed out these days. And so I think by putting not giving a fuck on the cover, it kind of tricks people into reading this book that they think is going to make them chill out. Essentially, the question of what do you give a fuck about? It's a question of values and priorities. And I strongly believe that the core question of our day and age is, what is worth caring about or what is worth focusing on? We live in an age where we are constantly overwhelmed with information and opportunity. And so the biggest struggle for most of us is to figure out where to delegate our attention, our limited time and attention, like what is worth focusing on, what is worth caring about. And it's a really, really hard thing to figure out. 5 years ago when the book came out, I think people were very unaware that struggle was going on within themselves. I think today people are generally aware that is a struggle, but as a culture, we still haven't really figured out how to tackle it.
There's a point in the book, I saw you post this recently on social media, where you say that you can't be an important and life-changing presence for some people without also being a joke and an embarrassment to others. What did you mean by that?
Any action or behavior that is exceptional is going to be polarizing in its responses. So if you're acting and behaving in a way to minimize conflict or confrontation, you're basically optimizing for doing nothing important because anything important is going to have some sort of disagreement or like people are going to see it differently. And so the more you're optimizing for something that's important, the more you're going to polarize people's responses. And the reason that feels profound to me, at least, is like, it's kind of an expectation. There's a little bit of a narrative bias in that, like, we look back in history, right? Like we look at somebody like Winston Churchill or like Theodore Roosevelt or Abraham Lincoln. Today, with the benefit of 50 or 100 years of history, it is uncontroversial that what Churchill or Lincoln did is a positive thing. Like it is not really debatable by like 99% of people that what they did were positive things. But that's with the benefit of history. Like if you look at the decisions they made in their own time, they were highly controversial. People were extremely upset. There was lots of debate. Everybody was angry. And so I think we forget that. We forget that there's pretty much never going to be that decision in your life that you are doing something both extremely important and extremely undivisive. The really watered down version of it is just like, haters going to hate.
And it's true. And coming back this idea of happiness, you confront it very early on. I mean, you say like this happiness stuff, it's a problem. And, a lot of people believe like, if I could just eliminate my problems, then I'll be happy. It's just this idea that let's say, whatever set of problems that somebody has, they resolve those things. And then in the absence of those problems, there's just joy and happiness. There's a story that you share. And I love reading this, especially for the plot twist, right? Of the Himalayan prince. Which is a great way of depicting this. If you're open to sharing that, but I think that helps to give an idea of like really kind of the root of happiness and perhaps the importance of suffering.
Again, right back to Eastern philosophy. I mean, it's essentially the mythological story of the Buddha. And I think it's very profound the way that the Buddha's story is laid out traditionally, which is he's born a prince. All of his needs are fulfilled. His father is the king or the Raja or the Sultan or whatever they were called back then. Gives him everything, anything he wants, all the food, drink, party, music, whatever he wants. It's always provided for him. And he becomes a very deeply sad and unsatisfied person. And so he decides to go to the other extreme, which is he wants to limit or abstain from everything. So he decides to go be a beggar on the street. He identifies that his having everything he wants is what's causing him to be unhappy. So if he figures like, well, if I just have nothing that I want, then I'll achieve enlightenment and feel happy or whatever. So he goes and lives in the street as a beggar. He realizes that sucks too. The same way you're, having everything you want just causes angst and stress and wanting more. Having nothing that you want causes angst and stress and wanting more. And so I think kind of the profound insight from his story is essentially that it's whether you are abundant in something or lacking in something, it's that attachment to that thing that is causing you to suffer, not the thing itself. I kind of modernize that in the book by talking, framing it in terms of happiness, which is like, if you think that you're going to get rid of all your problems and that's going to make you happy, well, trying to get rid of all your problems is itself a problem. Getting rid of your problems and keeping your life so that it has no problems is itself a problem. Any solution to a problem merely presents a new problem. And so there's kind of this endless stream of problems in life. And our problem is not that we have problems, it's that we think that we shouldn't have them, or that our expectation is that, it's possible to live without problems. The chapter is very much just a call to find problems you enjoy having. Like that's essentially what happiness is finding the struggle that enlivens you, makes you excited to get up in the morning, feels meaningful, essentially, because you're never going to get away from struggle. You're never going to get away from attachment, and you're never going to get away from problems. So you might as well find the ones that feel as though they are worth suffering for.
You mentioned before that like when most people are asking, what do you want out of life? Probably a better question is, what pain do you want in your life, or what are you willing to struggle for? I think it can yield a very different answer. You ask somebody what do they want in life, they say, I want to be happy, or there's this material thing, or whatever it is. But that's very nondescript. It's very ambiguous.
Yeah, well, and it's like not interesting, right? Like we all want the same stuff. Like we all want a nice house and a cool car and a great relationship and like tons of sex and money and fun and a great family. Like we all want the same shit. Like there's nothing particularly interesting or unique about that. The thing that makes us who we are is like what we're actually willing to sacrifice and what we enjoy sacrificing, right? The reason I'm a writer is not because I like sold a bunch of books. The reason I'm a writer is because I enjoy sitting by myself for weeks and weeks and weeks and like rewriting the same page over and over and over again. The reason somebody's a lawyer is not necessarily because they went to law school. It's because they thrive among the challenges that are required to do the legal profession well. So it's not the thing that actually makes you a unique individual is what you're able to give up or what you enjoy essentially giving up. We all want the same good stuff. It's like that's a given.
And this kind of lends us to the fact that, to achieve any of this and that going through the suffering, it's not always a great feeling. I mean, it's going to be difficult. You're going to experience adversity. It's going to be painful. It won't feel good unless you've gone through this journey and you've achieved happiness or fulfillment or whatever it is in just that process itself. I think many people can associate what doesn't feel good as being the thing that they should not be doing.
The fact that it doesn't feel good, that makes it meaningful. This is an argument I make in my second book, which is that by making modern life so comfortable, so safe and comfortable and emotionally insulated, we actually remove our ability to find meaning. Like if you think about like what are the most meaningful moments in your life, or like what are the things that you're most proud of in your life, there's not a single thing that you're proud of that didn't require some degree of struggle or sacrifice. It's a one-to-one relationship. Like there's, it's like nobody was like given a Ferrari for their birthday and they're like, man, I'm really proud of that Ferrari. It's like you didn't do shit. Human nature, like when things are given to you without any sort of sacrifice, you take it for granted. You don't appreciate it. And then it's the things that you struggle incredibly for that end up being the most meaningful things in your life. And so by like trying to insulate ourselves from any sort of struggle or hardship, the psychological side effect of that is that we tend to have more struggles with finding meaning or finding things that seem purposeful. Now, this isn't to say that we should all go back to like living in poverty and like killing each other. It's just to say that this is a side effect of the comforts of modern life. The same way a side effect of having the freedom to live wherever you want or work in any career you want is the stress and anxiety that comes with making the right choice. the side effect of being safe and comfortable is that you don't have as many opportunities to feel that sense of meaning that comes with sacrifice.
It's almost an idea that to truly be happy, one must also be in a state of constant struggle. I mean, I saw something you posted the other day where it said that the meaning your goals provide when you're working towards them is the meaning that is taken away once you achieve them. If you could elaborate on that.
Totally. And I experienced this hard, when my book took off and became a bestseller and everything, like it actually, like, I was probably the most depressed I had been since I was a teenager, simply because I didn't know what the hell to do. What now? I had this goal, kind of this dream of like becoming a best-selling author. And in my head, I was like, all right, I'm going to be writing books into my 40s and 50s, and I'm going to like build up a reputation and a core group of readers. And, maybe in like 10, 15 years, I'll get there. And it happened in like 3 months. And I spent like the next 6 like sitting around wondering what the hell to do with myself. Like my whole vision of my future and my identity was like kind of wrapped up in this long-term goal. And as soon as I got it, which was great, don't get me wrong, like I just felt very lost. What you said is totally true, in that a prerequisite for happiness is a constant source of struggle. Again, if you look outside the realm of emotions, like this is just like an obvious thing in other aspects of life, right? To have a healthy body, you have to constantly put it through stress and strain. To have a healthy career, you have to consistently surmount and overcome challenges. Like if you're working in a firm and like you're literally not accomplishing anything, like obviously you're not going to be promoted or you're not going to be given more responsibilities. In every other aspect of life, like we just understand it as obvious that you need struggle to progress. You need struggle to remain healthy and happy. But for some reason, when it comes to kind of our emotional life, we have this weird expectation that we should just be able to be happy. Like we shouldn't have to deal with anything.
In episode 98, I sat down with Andre Norman, Harvard University fellow, renowned keynote speaker, and the founder of the Academy of Hope, a violence reduction program that has transformed the cultures of some of the most dangerous prisons in America. He's also the best-selling author of Ambassador of Hope, turning poverty in prison into a purpose-driven life. One of the most memorable moments from our conversation was when Andre elaborated on what his experience was like behind bars.
Maximum security prison is a whole nother world. It's scary. There's no other way to describe it but scary. First time in, you should be scared to death. People get raped. People get beaten. People get stabbed. People get murdered. People get tortured daily across this country. So when I got there, I was scared. And they called me down to the unit team, and a nice caseworker sat me down and said, hey, you can go get your GED. You can learn how to drive a forklift. You can do all this other stuff, and you can make your time work for you. So at 1 o'clock, I'm lining up to go to school. And Dominic and the guys pulled up and like, where you going? We're going to the yard. I'm going to school. I'm about to get my GED, my forklift degree. And they're like, oh, you got the white lady story. What are you talking about? He said, you see them guys over there? They're a member of this white gang. When they find out that you're a loner, they're going to run up on you. They're going to beat you, rob you, and who knows what else. Do you think the caseworker's going to come help you? See them guys over there? They're going to come beat the shit out of you. You know why? Because you're a loner. You see the CO? He's going to have no respect for you. You know why? Because you're a loner. So you got a choice. You can go with the caseworker who's not going to help you, or you can come roll with us, and we're going to hold you down and make sure you're safe. I took your little handbook, flipped it in the trash, grabbed me a knife, and I went out to the yard. I didn't look back.
So in that moment, it's interesting because knowing now what you know, if you could go back to that point, was that true? Those are the only two options?
Yeah. Going back right now, unless I had some Mike Tyson skills, it wouldn't even make a difference because you outnumbered. So going back right now, if you put me back in that same unit at the same time, even with all the skills I have now, I'd have signed up. Because you can't beat the mob. Whether it's white, black, or Spanish, one man can't beat 20. I don't care how good you fight. So looking back at that particular situation, day one in the penitentiary, I'm signed up for the gang again. 100% no blame. Because that's how you're going to survive. You can't go to school if your jaw's wide shut. I'm saying you can't go to school, I'm saying if your head's split open. You're not going to forklift class if you got holes punched in your chest. It's not going to work. So you have to be safe before anything can actually transpire. And safety comes from being involved in that gang.
Man. So you have goals, right? I mean, out of 20,000 people, you've got up to what, number 3?
I got the number 3.
Number 3. Why number 3? I mean, I know I asked earlier, but just what why not in the top 10%, top 20%? Like, why become the regulator?
See, I'm an entrepreneur, and I believe in winning. I've never signed up for anything saying I want to be number 2. That's not American culture where you sign up and want to be 3rd place. The goal is to win. And in that space, wanting to be the ultimate winner, the toughest, most feared guy on the planet is a gang leader who runs the entire prison system, the ultimate shot caller. That's the number 1 guy. In politics, it's the president. It's not the governor. The number 1 politician is the president. The number 1 person in the penitentiary is a shot caller. The shot caller, not a shot caller. And I was like, I want to be the shot caller. And that was the goal. I want to be the top of the list. And I went on that quest, and I made it from number 20,000 to number 3. Then I had an opportunity to become number 1. Because again, it's about how much work you put in, how much violence and carnage you can inflict. When I got a chance to be number 1, I just had to hurt a couple more people, and I was there. And before I could do it, I had an argument with God. And God said, don't do this life choice. And me and God argued, but he won the argument. The way I explain it to people, it's like when Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz got to the end of the road and she wanted to get the tin hard and all the rest of the stupid stuff, she pulls the curtain back and the wizard's a fake. When I got to the end of the road and it was my chance to be the wizard, I pulled the curtain back and then I saw for what it was. It was all fake. It was like make-believe. This champion of champions is not champion of nothing. It's all made up. And I saw it for what it was, and God helped me realize that I picked a bad path and he was giving me another one. And this is the crazy thing about The Wizard of Oz. Nobody in Oz cared that the place was fake. They just were content to live in their little section of Oz and just keep going.
So in this moment, like this epiphany, like was this just like one day, one night, something where
one
just
afternoon,
like, that's it?
Clear. It was like, it came clear that I was about to become the king of nowhere. Boom, I'm about to become the king of nowhere. And I didn't want to be the king of nowhere. So I backed up, I went to my cell. I said, well, if I can't be a psychopath, what's the point of being in prison? It didn't make sense. Prison always made sense to me. That's why I was 100% all in, because I could rationalize it in my brain that this makes sense. And I want to be, I got this goal of being the number 1 guy. That goal is now gone. It's removed. I don't want to be the number 1 guy because I see it for what it was. I said, well, first time, 6.5 years. I said, I don't want to be here. I don't want to be here. It doesn't make sense to me anymore. So I said, well, I want to be free. Never said that before. Never even thought it. Then I looked around at the white guys, the black guys, the Spanish guys. I looked at the guys who worked in the kitchen, the guys who went to church, the guys who went to the mosque, the guys who worked in the kitchen, the guys who worked out on the yard, the basketball players, the chess players, the philosophers. They all got free and they all came back. Free doesn't work. So I said, I don't want to be free because it doesn't work. That's when I said, well, what do I need to do to not come back here? I said, if I'm successful, I won't come here. I said, successful people come from college. I'll go to college. I'll be successful and I won't come back. I had to pick a school. So I picked a school called Harvard University. And I picked Harvard not because it's the biggest school on the planet. It's 20 minutes from my house. I used to ride my skateboard there. So I came out my cell the next day. I told the fellas, yo, get together, check this out. They said, what's up? I said, I figured it out. I said, I'm going home. I'm going to Harvard. I'm going to be successful. And they looked at me. I said, no. I'm going home. I'm going to go to Harvard. I'm going to be successful. Now, they wanted to laugh at me, but I had a habit of stabbing people. So nobody laughed. Then one of my homies pulled me to the side and said, yo, Dre, what's up with this Harvard stuff? And he told me, you can't go to Harvard. I said, why? He said, you're black. I said, I know that. He said, you're a criminal. I said, I know that. He said, you're a gang member. I said, I know that. He said, you're in the hole for trying to kill 8 people. I said, I know that. He said, you was talking about killing 7 people yesterday. I said, yeah, I know that. He said, you can't read that good. He just kept telling me all the reasons I couldn't go to Harvard. And what I was hearing were my friends from the 9th grade stealing my trumpet. I was like, dude, fall back. Call my mom, call my dad, call my grandmother. And I realized I was on my own. So I stood in the mirror. I said, what's inside of me that's stopping this dream from happening? I'm done blaming other people. Because up until then, I blamed everything or everybody for what happened in my life or didn't happen. I said, what's inside of Andre Norman that's stopping this from happening? And I sent it up. I made a list. I started working on my list. I got my GED first. Then I started going to anger management classes because I had a slight anger management problem. Then I went to the law library and taught myself the law. I became a jailhouse lawyer. I reversed my case on appeal. I started going to self-help groups. I started going to programs. I started writing my own book. I started doing everything I could to better Andre, to put myself in a position to be successful. Then I went to the parole board, and the first time I went, they told me no. Walked in, they heard my story, heard my pitch, they said no. And instead of being the angry black man, which is who I used to be, I asked them, I said, why did you say no? They said, you know something, usually we don't tell people. And they told me why they said no. I had an understanding. I went back and I worked on their list. When I came back the next time, I won my parole. Then November 15th, 1999, I walked out of prison with a GED and a goal. Prison Parole Office Youth Center. I started talking to little black kids who looked just like me not long ago, telling them, you're going to jail not because you're black. You're going to jail not because you smoke weed or carry a gun. Somebody let you down, they haven't been there for you, and it hurts. And you act out. At 8 and 9, it was cute. At 14 and 15, it's criminal. Let me show you how to heal yourself internally and deal with your trauma, and you can live a great life. Started with black kids, then started with black girls, then it was Spanish kids. When they asked me to go to the white school, like, white kids ain't got no problem. This is their country. They own everything. I went to a white school. They drink at the white school. They do drugs at the white school. They have bullies at the white school. They had fat kids at the white school. That was crazy. All the shows I grew up watching, white kids had it fixed by the end of the half hour. So to walk into a privileged suburban school when these kids had problems, it was too much for me. I was like, wow, they got jacked up lives just in a bigger house. I realized being 15 was tough no matter where you came from and what you look like. So my philosophy became, if you call me, I'll show up. No more screening or check the box. You call me, I show up. And for 22 years, I've been showing up.
It almost seems like you're a man on a mission of wanting to either pay it forward or with all the speaking you're doing and working with youth and so on. Why approach it that way? Like what in you, rather than just focusing on Andre and saying, let me just worry about myself, why want to influence others?
When I wanted to change my life, the Ton Schaefer, who was I'm Jewish, I'm chaplain at the prison. When nobody else would come within 100 feet of me, this man sat with me. And he coached me, and he educated me. He taught me respect. He taught me accountability. He taught me how to be human. Of all the people I met prior to Natan, nobody had taught me how to be human. They taught me how to crush, kill, destroy, not cry, handle the pain. They taught me it's not the one who inflicts the most pain, but who can endure the most pain, who wins. All this madness they taught me. He taught me to be loving. He taught me to be caring. He taught me that I was a vessel of good. And then the people who fed into me, even though I didn't deserve it, there was a CEO named Rob Henderson. He let me into the anger management block. When people didn't want to come near me because of my status, he gave me a shot. He said, man, move in the anger management block, I think it'd be good for you. And he let me in. He took some heat for it, but I went in there and I crushed it. I was in the block for probably 3 months. And the first time in the history of this program, they went to the warden and said, can we hire this man? He's that good. They said, you can't hire prisoners. But Rob Henderson gave me a shot. Natan gave me a shot. Sister Ruth and Sister Kathleen gave me a shot. There's a guy named Pat Dempsey, a Catholic volunteer, used to come in every week and sit with me. And he gave me a shot. There were so many people who gave me a chance when I was technically undeserving. And so when I got free, when I got loose and I got on my path to success, I'm going to tell you the one thing that Tom taught me. Of all the things, success is not a success without a successor. So if you're not helping somebody else become successful, you're not successful, you're just lucky. And I took that to heart. So my goal is to help people be successful. What their success that they want is not relevant to me. Just get there. Stay alive and get there.
In episode 112 of the podcast, I sat down with the leader of the largest female-founded law firm in America, Jan Dills. Jan's road to success was by no means an easy one, and one of my favorite moments from our conversation was hearing about the, let's say, exciting start to her legal career.
Well, in the middle of law school, I married my husband. We've been married 29 years. I ended up having to stay in my hometown, of a little town of Parkersburg, West Virginia. So at that point, corporate law wasn't part of the program. So I had to change gears. And I worked for a local attorney, brilliant criminal attorney, also had a PI practice. And then I was admitted to the bar in October. Shortly thereafter, he had to take a leave of absence, and it was supposed to be 3 months. Ended up being a year. And his deal was, here are my cases, hundreds of criminal cases. I'll pay your rent and you stay here and run the business as long as you keep my cases alive. And that's what I did.
Wow. Okay. So then what was going through your head at the time? You're now officially a lawyer, and now here's all these different cases to take on. You're kind of, in a way, you're on your own.
Right. I'm on my own. So no salary. And at that point, he said, sorry, I can't pay you. He had already been paid for his cases. I wasn't getting paid there. I got on the court-appointed list. I started taking divorces and real estate law, that kind of thing. And I was the only one there. I basically ended up hanging my shingle and didn't want to, but it was the best thing for me. And within days of being admitted into the bar, I was arguing a case in front of the state Supreme Court.
So then, in having worked in all these different practice areas, what led you to gravitate towards Social Security disability?
It really was a fluke. I was just sitting there and we're, trying to pay the bills. I was 3 months behind on my house payment because I thought I was going to have a decent salary. And one employee was left from his practice. Everybody else had left. And there was one employee, Alice, that stayed for free, by the way, because I couldn't pay her. And she said, we're getting all these calls for Social Security, because he at one time had a huge Social Security practice. She goes, you just start doing these cases. And she's like, well, I said, I don't know how to do those. And she's like, well, you're learning everything from scratch. What's the difference? And so she goes, I'll teach you. So we started taking them. By the time a year was up, I had over 100 cases, because then it was word of mouth. Once I took one case and started working on it, it brought back memories for me. When I was about 12 years old, I went to the Social Security building with my aunt, who was sick, and she wasn't able to work anymore. And I remember going into the waiting room there and sitting there with her and watching her not be treated very well. And I still get emotional about it. And that just kind of clicked with me when I started taking my first case and started going through it. I'm like, this is what she was doing. This is the process, because they didn't teach Social Security law in law school. When I got out and started doing that, I knew that's what I wanted to do. First case.
And then, when you went off on your own, I think this was in 94, realizing, I guess Social Security, it had to be a volume practice. I guess, how did that influence how you would run the practice?
I hadn't been around anybody who had done it. I had a lot of people, other attorneys asking me, what are you going to do? And I said, I was doing everything to pay the bills. Social Security, there's such a lag. At that time, there was 4 years from the time you take a case to the time you go to a hearing. It was a 4-year waiting process at that point. It's now 2, but then the attorneys would be like, how are you going to make money at that? Because the fee was capped at that point. And it still is, but it was much smaller. And I just knew from my business background that it had to be a volume practice, and you had to do things real efficiently. It's not like a PI practice where their profit margins are so much better, but it was definitely a practice that you had to be efficient and you had to do a volume.
And with volume, I guess, comes advertising, and I imagine there's not a whole lot of that going on and really nationwide, and especially in West Virginia at the time.
That is completely correct. So back in, talking about 94 and early 95, the phone book rep came in, and the back of the phone book was available, and I bought the back of the phone book. Had no way of paying for it. I couldn't even pay for the secretary that was out outside my door, but he came in, and I was like, this is the way it needs to be. And because you can't, if no one knows you or has heard about you, and I just came out of law school, then how do they know what you do?
And I guess shortly after the phone book, I guess the other advertising starts to pick up. I imagine you start to gain some traction and start to see some success there. Did that kind of lead you to start to invest more and more in advertising?
It did. I started with the phone book. Of course, I came from a car dealership. So my dad was big on advertising. And so I was familiar with, the traditional advertisers, the TV, radio, and newspaper. So when I started after the phone book, and then I moved in 97, I cut my first commercial. That's when I really realized the power of it.
And I guess a prevalent theme across your life is really not taking no for an answer. Today, I know you have that also like trademarked, and there's the jingle.
Jan Dill's attorney at law. She won't take no for an answer.
And I'd love to hear about the origin of the jingle, because I think that played a very important role in the growth of the firm.
The jingle that I have is not the original jingle. It's like the 5th jingle, by the way. I went through 4 jingles and I just didn't like it. And it just wasn't me, and it was just hokey. And not that this isn't hokey, but this person that formulated this jingle sat down and talked to me and said, well, tell me about your life. And I would just went around and, we had a long conversation about how I got here, the perseverance coming through. My dad's a wonderful human being, but he motivated me without knowing he motivated me. So just applying to law school, saying, yeah, you'll never get in, and going back before that, many times where he would just say, you can't do that. And then that would just motivate me more. So when I was talking to the gentleman, that's how that came about.
I don't know what you thought about jingles in general, whether that would work or not. From what I recall, you were even reluctant to even take that meeting. You did it as a favor.
I did. So the reason I did the jingle was a friend of mine went to school with him. It was a radio rep. He thought, hey, this would be a great idea. I'm like, I'm already getting a lot of flack from my peers about being on TV. The last thing I wanted to do was put a jingle on top of that. But good family friend, I said, I'll take the call. And once I did that, I started seeing the value, and I had to put away the fear of being different and putting myself out there. And once we created it, I knew it was the right jingle.
So what do you think about it made it so successful? Like, what is it about a jingle, especially that at the time? Like, why did it work?
I don't know, but I wish I did know what was the secret sauce to that jingle. But I have generations come to me singing that jingle. It's just, you hear it once and it doesn't leave you. It's such a common saying, won't take no for an answer. It's just such a common saying. And then singing in that long drawn out tone, I think is part of it. And it's just easy to remember.
In episode 141, I sat down with the one and only David Goggins, retired Navy SEAL, ultra-endurance athlete, and the New York Times best-selling author of Never Finished, Unshackle Your Mind, and Win the War Within. But David's journey to becoming the game-changer he is today was filled with hardship and adversity. In fact, he's described his upbringing as a front row seat to a horror movie.
And Can't Hurt Me, my mom was like, you're not going to put some of my life in this. But over a period of time, I'm like, Mom, this just wasn't your fucking life. I was a young kid watching you go through this shit. I was living it with you. And I didn't have the brain to absorb the adult life that you put my childlike brain in. So I lived it even more than you lived it. So I had to get my mom to a point where she didn't even let me go here. So what I mean by that is I watched my mom, and I was able to put all of my horror to the side. Because when you're watching your mom go through horrific things, and I was never sheltered, it wasn't like my mom kept me from like my soon-to-be stepdad got murdered. It wasn't like she said, oh, we got to keep this from David. People tried to kill him several times before they finally killed him. And we continued going to this man's house. They tried to kill him in the garage that they finally shot him and killed him in. We were still going to the house where this man, they attempted to kill him, and we were going there almost every weekend. My mom just didn't give a fuck, and watching her get beat by my father, and then slowly watching her evolve into this woman who marries a guy that literally choked a woman to death and was in prison. And I'm watching all this shit unfold, and it was like watching a horror flick, and I was front row. Shit, I was part of the fucking director's crew. I mean, that's how close I was to the whole thing, man. It was crazy.
You state that when you're living in hell, the only way to find your way out is to confront the devil himself. Who was that devil for you?
It took several years for me to figure out who the devil was. And the devil was my father. The devil was my father, but what I didn't put and never finished was the devil really was me. So what happened was I put all this blame, and trust me, my father and a lot of people had to do with my upbringing on how shitty it was. But like I put in that book, no one's going to come back and say, hey, man, I apologize. Maybe someone does. Very few people will. So at the end of the fucking day, when all things are said and done with, while my dad was the devil, and I believed that for a long fucking time, I had to confront him. And when I confronted the devil, so what I thought was the devil, I realized that I was the true devil. I was the one holding me back. I was the one looking for the scapegoat. And, I was the one looking for all these ways to say, it's okay, David. You're a loser. You're a born loser, so it's okay. And I was hoping my dad was going to give me that confirmation. And he was a loser himself. But at the end of the day, when I left there, I realized, well, shit, man. It's on me. My dad's fucked up. My mom's fucked up. The people around me are fucked up. They're not going to save you. You got to fucking save yourself, my friend. So that's when all that reality hit me when I went to Buffalo to see my dad on that drive home. I was like, man, this rest of your life is going to suck. It is going to suck, not because you're going to be a loser, but because you're going to fucking finally start to win. And winning is not easy, my friend.
It's interesting how, going into Never Finished, you think about how did David Goggins develop this work ethic and enter Sergeant Jack, right? Because if there was, there was no Sergeant Jack, there may be no David Goggins. If you could elaborate on how he practiced discipline in his life.
Yeah, so Sergeant Jack, was my grandfather. He did 30-some years in the military, and it wasn't like he just did 30-some years in the military, man. This man retired from the military, and he pretty much made his own military. When he retired, that's when he became really hardcore, and he wore his uniform every day. When he retired, he wore that uniform every day. And I didn't know anything. I was some young kid that was tortured from my family, from my father. And I come in, when my mom left my father, we moved to Brazil, Indiana. My mom drives up, and I'm thinking I'm going to get some pity party from my grandparents. And Sergeant Jack looked at me, man, like I was a brand new recruit coming off the bus, man. He didn't give a fuck about what my dad did to me. He pretty much, without saying it, was like, look, young man, there's a lot of kids out there who live like you do, who have gone through what you've gone through. Maybe not as bad, but you're not the only one. And my grass needs to be cut. My cars need to be cleaned. The yard needs to be raked. He taught me a lot of lessons within the lesson of no one really gives a fuck. You have to continue to fucking live your life, or you can choose to be doomed and become a statistic. Like a lot of young people who fall back on their childhood when their childhood wasn't good. He never said any of this, though. It was through his actions, by not feeling sorry for me, by how he worked me like a dog, that it came to me that this is what life is. Life is a training ground. And like going through Buds and Ranger School, very few people make it through. While you may live a long life, it doesn't mean you fucking graduated at the top of the class. You just lived a long, boring, despicable life. And that's not what I wanted to do. So Sergeant Jack started me out young, and I had to learn these lessons on my own through the discipline of hard work and cutting the grass and raking the leaves and doing all these things before school and after school. And he just built a mindset in me that I was like, okay, one day I can fall back on this. But I realized that Sergeant Jack taught me something that I'm going to have to go back to for the rest of my life.
And it seems like there's like a correlation between someone's level of discipline and the standards they set for themselves. There's a quote in the book when you say that when a half-assed job doesn't bother you, it speaks volumes about the kind of person you are. And until you start feeling a sense of pride and self-respect in the work you do, no matter how small or overlooked these jobs might be, you will continue to half-ass your life. Is that like Sergeant Jack inspired?
No, that was really me inspired. So like I said, Sergeant Jack just worked me to death. And the lessons, it wasn't like Mr. Miyagi. Like I said, he was my Mr. Miyagi, but it wasn't like one day I got pissed off, wax on, wax off. It wasn't like that shit. As I was doing this stuff, I started having different feelings. Like I would always like half-ass my work. And Sergeant Jack would always say, you know what, you're going to get it. You're going to do it until it's done right. So I got tired of continuously trying to get this white wall, this tiny little white wall on this black tire completely done. And then when I started realizing I'm wasting my time, just fucking get it done, or I'm going to be out here in this fucking garage all day and night into the next day and night. And I said, you know what? Then when I started doing it the right time, first time, every time, Sergeant Jack never gave me like, hey, good job. He never said that. But I started knowing that I was doing good work because I wasn't doing it 20 times. I was doing it once. And then I started like, my God, this feels fucking good. It feels fucking good to fucking get a job, have a task, and put my all into that task, and then be able to move on to the next task because I completed that task to the fullest and the greatest of my ability. And then that feeling just stuck with me, and I was like, okay, this is what I need every day in my life. I don't need someone to say, good job, David. I don't need a fucking pat on the back. Everything became internal. I started feeling this feeling that I never had before. Like I thought I was a born loser. And just cleaning a tire and cleaning the car to the best of your ability changed everything. Raking the yard and not leaving one fucking leaf. Not one leaf. And then one would fall, and I would get that one leaf. It just became something that was like, okay, I see dirt. Don't pass the dirt. Clean the dirt. It just started absorbing. And before you know it, man, it just morphed into a man that was like, we got to get it done regardless.
David, I want to talk about this alter ego that you created, Goggins, right? And I'm curious, like, what led to the creation of the Goggins alter ego?
Well, discipline was huge, but then we always fall back on what's comfortable to us. What's comfortable for me was, if it's easy for me, I'm going to do it. And so when I was going through pararescue training, I ran up against an obstacle that I didn't think I was going to run up, and it was the water. I fucking hated the water. But I tried hard to get over that. And I would go to the pool, and I would try, but my mind wasn't strong enough. David Goggins, even with all the discipline, I didn't have that next fucking level. When you're truly committed to something, not like where you like, I want to be a doctor, but when I run into this roadblock, I don't want to be a doctor. No, I'm going to be a doctor come hell and high water. I needed that kind of commitment. And David Goggins didn't know about that commitment. I knew how to wash a car. I knew how to clean a house. I knew how to, do all these manual labor jobs. But when it came down to true suffering, to the highest of suffering, I didn't have that next level of, all right, motherfucker, we have this next level. David Goggins wasn't enough. So I went into my mental lab and realized, but I want to be great, but I don't have greatness in me. So I had to create a motherfucker that was great. And in my mind, I'm really big on visualization. And people may think it's all kind of bullshit. Believe what the fuck you want. I don't give a shit. This is a true shit right here, man. I went in my mind, I said, okay, I want to look like this. I want to feel like this, and I want to have a mind that is fucking cast iron steel. That is fucking never dull. That is always fucking sharp. That was the biggest thing I wanted. I wanted to hit obstacles that fucked most people up, including myself, but I didn't waver. I didn't fear. I didn't run away. I just stayed and marinated in the fucking fear, in the suffering. And through that, building Goggins, I will become Goggins when necessary. And I started to do these things on my own. I have my own training ground. I built a training ground. It wasn't Navy SEALs. If you go to Navy SEAL training not prepared, you're going to quit. So I built this training ground on my own. And I started doing these horrific things that David Goggins couldn't handle. But Goggins started slowly coming up. I started putting that visualization of the guy I wanted to create. And in that water, when things got hard and I was training on my own, Goggins would appear. Goggins would appear. When David Goggins would come up, Goggins would smack him the fuck down and say, no, motherfucker, we're going to drag you through this. And that's kind of how it happened over a period of time. This man evolved. Goggins became the guy that can withstand all kind of torture and pain and keep coming after you. And that's where that next step with evolution became.
In episode 158, we're revisiting my conversation with Alex Hormozy, the founder and managing partner of Acquisition.com. With his innovative approach to marketing and sales, he's guided numerous entrepreneurs to success. Entrepreneurs undergo remarkable transformations, a journey of evolution. So, how did Alex's own evolution unfold?
So first thing I did was I started an online training charity business. So people would pay, but then I would donate the money. And that was just kind of like get my feet wet with people giving me money, even though I didn't take it personally. Then I quit my job and asked the same people who were paying the charity if they would pay me instead so that I could like eat. I was like, I'm the charity now, and they were all good with it. From there, I started my first gym. From that gym, opened up 5 more. From there, I had a mentor say that this, he was like, you're really good at running gyms. You shouldn't be owning more gyms. You should kind of teach other people how to run gyms. And so from there, we did turnarounds for 2 years. So we'd fly out to brick and mortar gyms, kind of put all of our systems in place and turn it around in 30 days. That was kind of the offer. And then from there, that became really logistically painful. You've got 8 sales guys going out to 8 different locations across the nation every single month, away on the road 21 to 24 days a month, which is tough for families, et cetera. By a stroke of luck, there's a million very sad stories in between here, but by a stroke of luck, I was supposed to launch 6 or 8 gyms the next month, and we had decided to pivot to go direct to consumer selling weight loss because we were familiar with that. And I told the gym owners that we were supposed to launch that I wasn't going to do it. And one of the guys was like, hey, could you just show me what you're doing rather than flying out here? And I was like, sure. How much? And I just picked a really high number, and he said yes. And I was like, holy cow, that was pretty cool. And so then I told all the other guys the same thing, and they were like, how much? And I just kept increasing the number, and they all said it was fine. And then I called all the gyms I did the turnarounds for and said, remember that thing I did? Can I just license the model to you? And they were like, yeah, that's fine. And so that's when we got into licensing. That was 2017. That was like April, May of 2017. And then it took off like a rocket. And so then, 5,000 locations later, that's where Gym Launch is today. We started a supplement company in between there to sell through that distribution base. So that was e-commerce. And then we started Allen, which is a software company that worked leads for brick and mortar businesses. That was the next year after that, all selling to that same audience. And then in 2021, in December, we sold 2 of those companies. So Gym Launch and Prestige Labs to American Pacific Group, which is a private equity group out of San Francisco. And we sold that for 46.2. And then we sold the software company for an undisclosed amount to a strategic buyer. So we sold 75% of that in an all-stock deal. From there, we started our family office, which is Acquisition.com, which we started the day after we sold. And now we have, I think, 11 portfolio companies.
I know you've worked with many, many different founders. I mean, in all sorts of different businesses, services-based businesses, software. I mean, the full gamut. Like, are there any particular traits that you've seen in the most successful founders that kind of separate the most successful from the least successful?
Yeah, they're humble. If you have humility, you can do a lot. Because if somebody's humble, then they can accept feedback. If they can accept feedback, then they can change. I mean, it's very difficult to, basically, if someone doesn't have humility, then it means that whoever they are day 1 has to be the person that they need to be at day 1,000. Because if they can't admit a deficit, then they can't improve. And so humility is by far the biggest one. Beyond that, they have to have drive. They have to have some reason that they're going to do it, whether it's, away from fuel or towards fuel. Like, they have to have some sort of drive. There's a big study on this that I've been quoted a lot for, even though it's not my study. But it's, the 3 most common traits that they've seen. It's not the early wake up time. It's not a lot of, it's not the healthy eating. It's not the cold plunges or the affirmations, but the 3 common traits are that they had a superiority complex. So they believe that they can do big things. They want to chase after big goals. The second is that they have crippling insecurity and that they feel they'll never be enough, and that they have impulse control. And so if you have a big goal and you have big fuel and you don't stray the path and you do it for a very long period of time, you'll probably win.
Yeah. It's almost like, I think there's a book, it's called like The Manic Edge, to a degree. It's like you almost have to be crazy in a sense. I mean, you think about entrepreneur, the idea of starting a business, the risk that you take on. I mean, obviously, I think Shark Tank maybe has popularized this to an extent, but when you look at the reality of it, it's not always a great proposition. I mean, I think now with a lot of like social media culture, it's this idea of, working remotely from your laptop. Everybody's making $40,000 a month. I don't know why people get stuck on this number, but I don't know that it really depicts an accurate portrayal of what this journey is.
Yeah, well, I think the average, I think the average small business owner takes home like $50,000 a year. I mean, the average small business owner makes the same as the median household income. So, from that sense, it's one person versus a household. So I guess in that sense, they have to make a little bit more money. They also take on significantly more risk personally in order to do that. So I agree with you. I think that I think right now it's in vogue. It's cool. I mean, it is the way to make the most money. It's also the way to lose the most money. So it is, at definition, the highest risk, highest reward game. But, to quote Warren Buffett, I think the reason business is so risky is because people don't know what they're doing. And that's kind of the nature of it, is that when you start, you're ignorant. The biggest debt you pay is the tax of not knowing, right? You're not knowing what you do. He also says that it's only risky if you don't know what you're doing. And so once you do know what you're doing, then there's not nearly as much risk in business. But the only way to know what you're doing is to get in the game, which means you have to incur lots of risk to get in. And then the more you play, the better you get, and the less risky it is, and the higher reward is.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like in many cases, it's like the solution's making good decisions. How do you make good decisions? Experience. How do you gain experience? Bad decisions. And, and the cycle repeats. Something you shared before that I thought was very interesting is just the differences between how the most successful people view time and their approach to time horizon. If you could elaborate on that.
You can pretty easily tell how successful an entrepreneur is by looking at two elements of time. One is the increments of time they speak in. So if they talk in decades, they talk in multiple decades, they talk in lifetimes, they talk in generations, I can almost guarantee you it's going to be a significantly more successful entrepreneur than the one who talks about next week, next month, even next quarter. And it's such a small thing, but it's pervasive. Like you can hear it in conversation. You can immediately know, oh, this guy's only doing this much, because the only way to do really big things is to think on a much longer time horizon. The second component is how they manage the micro, which is if you look at someone's calendar and how they allocate their most scarce resource, which is time, you can see where they're going to be in 6 or 12 months. So if you look at the calendar as the balance sheet of someone's time asset and how they allocate it, their time budget, then you will see where they're going to get their returns. And so if we look at a founder and we look at their calendar, we can tell how the company's going. We can usually see how we need to fix it, because fundamentally most entrepreneurs work all the hours of the day. Most of them do, right? And so if they're not making the amount of money that they want to make, it's because they're doing the wrong stuff. And that's usually the biggest issue. And they think they need to work harder, but they've already maxed out their hours, which means fundamentally they're wrong. They're seeing a distorted reality. They think this is going to work, and it is not.
Are there particular things that you see? I mean, just even looking like at an entrepreneur's calendar where you're like, okay, well, that you can tell right away, okay, this is not optimized, or the focus isn't in the right place. Like what types of things stick out?
Well, the single common trait that every entrepreneur has to get over time is relinquishing control. So entrepreneurship is a continual giving up of control at all levels. And so whatever they're doing is usually the thing that they need to be able to give up and transfer to somebody else in order to get further and further above the business and get more leverage. And so in the beginning, you have to give up delivery, or you have to give up selling, or you have to give up promoting, you have to give up something, or administrative tasks. And you look at your calendar and you say, which of these things is most easy to replace in the marketplace and is the cheapest one that I can replace? And you replace the first one that gives you the most time for the least amount of money. And then you're like, great, now I should fill my time up with the thing that makes me more money. And fundamentally, that is the game, is you just continue to trade up the time until you have bought all of your time back. And then you can just do all the highest level leverage activities. And leverage just being defined as getting more for what you put in.
Yeah. Now, this is a concept that I think when people hear it, they probably will nod along. And yet, you and I both know this. I think so many entrepreneurs struggle with it and struggle with that relinquishment of control. No one can do it as well as they can. No one can do it, quite the way they do. What's the answer there? Like, how do you get somebody to the point where they actually start doing it?
Confrontation. This is why you're poor. Like, you can keep doing what you're doing. It's just you're going to keep getting what you're getting. And so the question is whether you want to keep getting what you're getting, or you're willing to change something. I mean, it's the same as somebody trying to lose weight saying, I want to keep eating the same diet, but it might look the same. You're like, yeah, so you have a diet of time that you continue to eat, or let something else eat your time every single day. And you expect the outcome to look different, and it's just not true. And so I think just a very logical breakdown where someone just you have to confront it. You have to confront reality. And a lot of entrepreneurs are delusional, sometimes in a good way. You have to be optimistically delusional in a certain capacity to be an entrepreneur. But a lot of times that delusion takes control, and they believe the false statements that you just said, right? Which is like, no one can do it like I can do it. I'm irreplaceable, et cetera, et cetera. But like every single human on planet Earth is replaced in 100 years.
Yeah.
And the likelihood is that if you were doing it and you're also doing other things, then somebody doing full-time what you're doing will be better than you are. And I can virtually guarantee that 100 people doing full-time what you're doing are going to be better than you are. So a little side quest here. A lot of entrepreneurs learn the wrong lessons from experiences. So we talked about having experiences earlier, right? And you make the lesson, et cetera. But the thing is that most people learn the wrong lessons. So I'll give you an example. Small business owner hires the first salesperson. They're like, I'm going to give up control of sales. I'm going to give it to this person. They're going to start selling. And of course, the person tanks. Okay. Because they also don't know how to hire, manage, recruit, train salespeople because they don't have that skill set yet either. But they bring this person on, the person fails, right? There's lots of lessons you can get from that. But one lesson that's common is that salespeople don't work, right? Or no salesperson can sell like I can, right? And so then as soon as they have that belief, forever, until that belief is changed, they will not make more money. And the thing is there's a lot of those salesman beliefs at every single level of entrepreneurship. But the correct lesson is phrasing the thing that didn't work as deficiency personally, which is, okay, this salesman didn't work. I do not know how to, and then insert the problem. Recruit, hire, train, manage a salesperson. Great, that's solvable. Let's go solve that. And then that is the process all the way up. But you have to admit it. It's like AA, right? You got to admit you have a problem. And until they do, and that's where the humility comes into play, and that's what plateaus. Many entrepreneurs, they cannot admit that anyone else could do it better than them. And most people could do it better than you. And I think it's a much better belief. They're like, everyone can do everything better than me. It's great. I'm not needed. And that's the point. You want to own the business, not have the business own you.
It's interesting. It's like so many entrepreneurs I meet, I don't know if this direct correlation exists, but it seems like the more successful they are, I mean, when you really start getting up there 8 figures, 9 figures, 10 figures beyond, it's like you start to see greater levels of humility. And I wonder if to an extent, and this doesn't apply to everyone, but it's always striking to me how someone can still have ego if they have built a business from nothing, and just the humbling process of even building an organization, the lessons you have to learn, how, just the challenge that you experience, the pain, in many cases, that to come out of that with ego. But yet the ones that know all the answers, have it all figured out, no, I'm good, I already read that book, I already heard that, like they're the ones that seem to be struggling the most.
I agree. I also think that you can have situational ego, because there are definitely some very wealthy people who are very successful who do have egos who are self-made. Like I can attest to that. There are also many, many, many who are very humble in general. But I think it's also domain specific. You can be humble in business and arrogant with women. You can be arrogant with your physique, but humble. You know what I mean? So I think it's a little bit more nuanced overall. That being said, there's totally people who are arrogant in everything they do. But I do think that it's more domain specific. And even within the business, somebody might have an ego around how good they are at marketing, but not an ego around how good they are at HR, right? And so it really comes down to how do they associate their self-worth with something. However close the action is to the association they have with their identity and their worth, the harder it is to peel away from their grip. Like a lot of entrepreneurs who are promotional or product-driven entrepreneurs don't have any problem outsourcing finance. Like it's not like they don't have a huge thing with that, right? But they have a huge problem if someone wants to take over product or take over promotion or whatever for the business. And so it's because they just derive their self-worth from that. And so that's why a lot of the entrepreneurship is a head game.
In episode 187, we dive into my conversation with Dan Martell, serial entrepreneur, investor, and the best-selling author of Buyback Your Time. Dan has helped countless business leaders reclaim their time and scale their companies efficiently. I asked Dan about his groundbreaking buyback principle and how it can revolutionize the way you manage your law firm.
I wrote the book because I've been an entrepreneur for 25 years. Entrepreneurship literally saved my life. I talk about the beginning of the book. I grew up in an alcoholic family, ended up in getting in trouble, and had a whole chaotic side to my life where I ended up in prison twice by the age of 17. And luckily through some really incredible people showing up in my life at the right times, I made it through this really dark period. Being better to build our business, because really that's what entrepreneurship is about. If you want your company to grow, you have to grow. And I went on this journey my whole life, my whole career, of just trying to figure out, like, what's my next level? How do I expand? How do I audit my behaviors, my mindset, my beliefs, my worldviews, my character traits, all these things, so that I became more, so I had more to give, so I could serve at a higher level. And then I would have people over the last 25 years that I, again, super blessed to have built and exited, some very significant companies, becoming a millionaire when I was 27 to, now running a $100 million fund. And I've invested, I think, in 60 companies. I just wanted to take my very unique approach to time and energy. And it's very different from anything that's ever been written about before, because it's based off of 1,500 books I've read on productivity and leadership and company growth.
I tried to write the book that I would have wanted when I was starting off. And I wrote the book for the creators out there, the entrepreneurs, because I want to teach people how to build a business they don't grow to hate. And unfortunately, that's what happens to most entrepreneurs, you know. And even though today a big part of my life is going back and talking to the kids that find themselves in the place that I found myself, and that's probably the thing I'm most proud of, is just continuing to support the next generation of entrepreneurs. I wanted to write a book to help my friends do more with their companies and to find a way to build a business that lit them up, that actually created wealth for their families. Because the truth is most people have these beliefs that the bigger the business gets, the harder it gets. And that doesn't have to be the case. And I prove that, I think, very clearly in my book using first principles and math. You can literally build an empire. And for me, an empire is a life of unlimited creation you never have to retire from. I wrote it for all the entrepreneurs out there, for my brother who's a home builder, for my wife who runs an agency, to all my best friends that run HVAC companies and sign companies. I just wanted to kind of write a process that I've been using that's blessed my life and share it with the world. So that's the movement I'm out there to create. It's just teach people how to use the buyback principle to build meaningful companies that they don't hate.
And I know you mentioned it a few times, just the buyback principle. So people who are not familiar with this, when you say this throughout the book, and I listened to the audiobooks, I heard you mention it numerous times of hiring not to grow the business, but hiring to buy back your time. Can you elaborate on that and what kind of the difference and almost like the mindset shift is with that approach?
The big idea that I share with people is the concept of calendar over capacity. Most people, when they hire individuals to help them in their business, contractors, team members, part-time people, full-time, it doesn't matter. When you spend dollars, labor to hire somebody, most people do it to add capacity to their business, right? I've got demand now. I need help with shipping. I need help with writing more code. I need designers because I have a design agency or a PR agency or whatever. I've got somebody that does fabrication, whatever it is. They're like, I've got a capacity problem. The challenge with that is you could hire people to add your capacity, but it actually doesn't make your life better. And if anything, it adds complexity. More people means more things you have to manage. And if you haven't bought back the lower value tasks to free up your time to go do the higher value stuff, then that's where you end up building a business that might have grown in top line revenue, but you actually make less profit because you hire out a sequence, right? In the book, I talk about this concept called the replacement ladder. And it's really the sequence of hires in the order that costs the least amount of money, dollars, to gain back the most amount of time, like freedom, to then for you as the CEO to do the activities that light you up, that make you the most money. And if you keep making your trades using the buyback principle through that lens, then it's almost impossible for you to grow the business and not enjoy the process, because as you do it, you're literally you're using your calendar as the map, as the auditing place, right? And I teach time and energy audits. Even today, this week, there's one meeting in my calendar that's orange, that's not red, but it ain't green, that I now have to find a way to get out of, either hire somebody or delegate it or cancel it. Honestly, sometimes we just got to delete. The moment I do that, now my whole week is exciting. There's no aspect of my week where I'm like doing something that I want to absolutely, truly enjoy and love. And that's just a really powerful place to get to. So I just really want to teach people the philosophy of, we don't hire people to grow our businesses. We hire people to buy back our time. If we do the second, we get the first. But if we do the first, we don't always get the second.
Sure, there's many people who are going to be listening to this podcast that like the idea of this, but they will say they struggle with delegation, or they fear that they won't find somebody they can delegate to that can do it as well as they can. I know in the book you talk about the fact that 80% done by someone else is 100% freaking awesome, which I agree with. How do you help people get over the idea that you do have to delegate if you want to be able to buy back your time, and then also the fact that it's okay if they don't do it 100% as well as you do?
It's the crux of every entrepreneur's journey, right? I remember when I didn't have any employees and I didn't follow my logic that I learned today, and I hired a programmer because I was writing code, and I was like, well, I'm busy writing code, I need to hire another programmer. All of a sudden, I'm really critical about this person's work, right? And they don't do it as good as me, and then I get frustrated that I have to redo the work or that like I spent the money to pay them to do it, but it wasn't done as good as I could have just did it myself. I could have saved myself the time and the hiring and all these things. And logically, I can see where people get to like, that makes sense. But here's what everybody needs to understand is what is the purpose of building a company, right? My gut tells me that people want to build a business so they can get to a place, ideally fairly quickly, where the business can generate revenue without them being involved in any part of the business, right? Even if you're an artist, like, and the book is, I use a lot of examples of authors and real artists that understand how to build a production process that creates their unique output, their craft, their giftedness, and demonstrates that to the world, but in a way that's scalable so that if you want to go on vacation, your business doesn't go to zero. I mean, my brother sells homes and one of his customer segments are doctors. A lot of his customers, when he's talking about, how's things, how's life, are you taking vacation? Many of the doctors say to him, well, I would love to take vacation, but the challenge is not the cost to go on vacation. It's the lost revenue if I'm not doing surgery or if I'm not doing my practice. And that's a part that I don't think people use in that equation. So like when as soon as I realized like, oh, having somebody else write code for me, somebody else being paralegal or an assistant or whatever it is, even at 80% as good as me, is buying back 100% of an hour. That trade is amazing, right? Anytime I look out through my day and I see something, even if it wasn't done to the level I would have loved to or expected it to be done, the fact that it got done by somebody else and I didn't spend an hour, I do a lot of Ironman events and stuff. So like maintaining my bikes and like charging all the batteries and the devices and the Bluetooth and it doesn't connect. And like just right before we started, we had a Wi-Fi problem. We're blessed to have a house manager, Betty. And I just messaged Betty and I was like, hey, can you deal with the Wi-Fi? And she knows the protocol. Boom, boom, boom. Next thing you know, we're good to go. So like even just figuring out anything that you don't do that somebody else does, it's such a gift. It's such a blessing. That mindset of shift of gratitude is what's missing for most people. Instead of the frustration, you should be like, wow, somebody else did this and I wasn't involved in it. So I could go work on something that is more meaningful that could actually move the business forward. I think most people just don't have enough self-worth that if they actually had that time back, that they would trust themselves to do something productive with it. And that's why they're critical of other people instead of reflecting on the fact that they got the time back so they could do something that only they could do that actually moves their dream forward.
In episode 232, I sat down with Ross Pomerantz, the creative mind behind the popular corporate bro persona. As a former tech sales professional turned content creator, Ross uses humor and satire to highlight the realities of corporate life and the importance of authenticity and accountability in business. I asked Ross about his experience in sales and how it shaped his content.
Well, I'm from here, from Atlanta. I was telling other folks, I haven't been back in 19 years. It's been a minute, but Atlanta was hugely influential on me. I mean, I was, growing up on Outkast and, that'll make you some sort of way. And I moved to the Bay Area when I was 13, 14, like right when I was just starting to talk to girls. So that was a rough time for me. And I...
No accent.
No accent. So I still say y'all and it'll come out a little bit in certain situations, mostly involving drinking. But when I moved, people were like, oh, you say y'all, do you live on a plantation? I would get ridiculed. New kid in school. Everybody's been going to school together for 7-8 years. And I just got bullied for it. So I went from saying y'all to saying hella. And it's or hecka before you could say hella, before your parents will let you say that. So I lost the accent. And it's one of my bigger regrets because the accent kind of plays. But I grew up a big baseball player, kind of played all the sports, thought I was going to be a major leaguer, still a huge Braves fan. No one told me that I was going to only be 5'11". So I wasn't exactly projectable to scouts. I threw pretty hard and I had a 2-year stint in independent minor league baseball. But I decided, I was like, if I'm not successful in baseball, I'm going to be successful in business. What the fuck does that mean? I don't know. I didn't even know what it meant. I don't know, business, or just do business stuff. And so like many washed up athletes with no hard skills at all who didn't focus that hard in college, I ended up in sales, tech sales. So I went to go work at Oracle for a business development role. And I was like, yeah, I'm down to go develop some business. Like, I don't know what that means, but Oracle, that's where the Warriors play. And it was sales. Turned out it was sales. So I was on the phones, ripping dials, calling, IT folks, selling products I didn't understand, working with Fortune 100 companies, which is wild. I'm like 22. I don't know what the hell anything is, and slanging deals. And so during that time, I was miserable, as most folks are in sales, because it's a really hard job. And one of the greatest skills you can possibly learn. You were forced to learn it when you were pitching this company or pitching this product for, those 20, it was probably a lot more than 21, 22 times. But I was like, I got to document this. I was like, how the hell is this? I was in this building called Twin Dolphin. So Oracle has this beautiful campus right off the freeway, and they're shaped like database buildings. Database is not a physical thing, but in theory, they build the buildings in the shape of databases. Cool. Across the streets where all the salespeople go, in this shithole called Twin Dolphin. 4,000 salespeople, place smelled horrible. It was like a locker room, truly. 20 to 40 years old, slanging millions and millions of dollars. No idea what they're selling, no idea what they're doing. And I was like, why is no one talking about this? Like, this is how I ended up here in the first place, because no one told me what this was. I just was like, oh, that's a cool sounding company, and I'm going to go there. And that's when I started Corporate Bros. I looked around, I was like, everybody here is just a corporate bro. Man, woman, doesn't matter, corporate bros. We're all wearing like button downs and khakis and whatever dress stuff that didn't quite fit us. We'd go party super hard on the weekends, come back just hungover and do it all over again. And I was like, yeah, I got to document this. So I created Corporate Bro, which was, for lack of a better description, the video version of Dilbert. So Corporate Bro was always third person, and I was playing the character of Corporate Bro. So it all started as Corporate Bro has a rough sales call. Corporate Bro nearly dies in his chair. We had these chairs that would lean back slightly too far. That moment where you're like, oh my God, I thought I was going to tip. They were never going to tip, but you feel like that. So it's all the little things. Back when headsets were wired, you'd forget it was around your neck. Someone's like, you want to go to lunch? You get up, you walk away, and you hang yourself briefly. So it was just making fun of dumb little shit like that, and it was purely catharsis.
And this was around the time, I think, was Vine that was taken off?
Vine, exactly. Yes, 6-second videos back in the infant days of social media, before Instagram even had video, long before TikTok. I mean, Vine was basically the OG TikTok. They just didn't have the algorithms. They didn't have the machine learning and all that stuff. So I just was making it for my team. I didn't have any intent to be a social media content creator or influencer, as they say. I just did it because it made me feel better.
And you can tell, I mean, the content obviously resonates with people. I mean, you look in the comments, people are sharing it, they love it. Has there ever been people who receive the content or they see it and they don't understand that it's satire or that it's
all the time
comedy?
All the time. And frankly, majority of it's because of the word bro. Like when I started this, bro was a word everybody used, and it didn't have quite the negative, connotations that it does now. Book Brotopia came out, talking about Silicon Valley bro culture, all of those things. And I get a lot of visceral reactions to just the name, just the handle name, Corporate Bro. Like, oh, fuck that guy. Fuck that guy. Well, the whole point is I'm making fun of like this. I'm like making fun of this world. Like I'm calling the bullshit on this, but people don't want to go there. God, we could talk at length about how polarized people are and how quick people are to be pissed about things. And that's kind of what we're all tuning ourselves to, is to be upset. And a lot of that is thanks to social media. But yeah, a lot of people don't receive it that well. I think because of that, there's a slight barrier to entry for my content. Like I think it's similar to sales. To get into my content, you need to see it a few times, buy into the shtick. Like a lot of comedians, you don't like them, and then you hear enough jokes and you're like, oh, you start to get on their level, and they're like, oh, now you're immersed. And so once people are in, they love it, but I'm not going to say it's for everyone. It's definitely not for everyone.
Yeah. But, and I will say, I mean, just especially salespeople who experienced either the exact thing that you're depicting or versions of that, I mean, it obviously resonates with them. They're like, okay, one of us, someone's bringing this to light. I think the goal also, I heard you mention this before, is to encourage more accountability in this world.
Just accountability. I mean, just across the board. A lot of my stuff recently has been making fun of CEOs and layoffs and so forth. And just like the heartlessness that has been taking place and has taken place for so long. And now social media has allowed people to expose it. There was a huge video that went viral of an account executive who was fired from Cloudflare. She posted her layoff video, and it was a tough listen. And like her story, while it blew up in the media, this story's been happening for years. And so a lot of what I like to do is just call bullshit on this whole idea of professional. I think professional is often used as a crutch to be fake and remove the humanity out of business and life, which is just fundamentally irresponsible and stupid to do, because business is relationships, and that's fundamentally human. And so a lot of people don't like that. I've flown very close to the sun many times. I'm waiting for my cease and desist, my lawsuits to hit.
Yeah, Larry Ellison.
Any listeners out here want to defend me when that happens, that would be really great. In the court of public opinion, it's a good thing. But you still got people being like, how dare she do that? Like, it's private information. It's like, companies don't give a shit about you. Businesses are there to make money. Like that's capital. That's how it works. And I'm not saying that's wrong necessarily, but I say don't fall in love with your company because it'll never love you back. Like that's true. You fall in love with the people you work with at your company, and you want to work for those people. You don't want to work for the company itself. You want to work for the people. And the more people that people are, it's all gonna be better. So yeah, I try to call the bullshit. I make enemies doing that. And I can die on that hill. I'm okay going down on that hill. Stop fucking with people. That's it. I don't know. I'm not trying to be the arbiter of justice, but
no, I will
have
say,
a platform.
Like we work with a lot of businesses that are small business that do care about their people. That a lot of them are trying to do their best. So I wouldn't say it applies to everyone, but the examples you mentioned, I agree 100%. When a company is hiring a ton of, let's say a giant sales force, and shortly after they're laying them off, and these are people that weren't even fully ramped yet, right? I mean, they didn't even have an opportunity to miss quota, right? So that type of thing obviously is no good. You see it a lot. You're right in SaaS. I mean, it's been very, very common there. But I want to say for the people listening, because you have a lot of small business, they're not all bad.
No, not at all. I'm definitely not saying they're all bad. Small businesses are the ones where the relationships tend to be the best, where you get more of that face time. It becomes, as companies get bigger, it's harder to maintain that culture of humanity, and that's the challenge. But of course, no business, just like no band playing in concerts in their garage, like doesn't want to go play Madison Square Garden. It's not like a band can go interact with every single one of their people. Like they're going to lose some of that human. That's how it works.
In episode 242, I sat down with Game Changing Attorney Podcast returning champion Chris Voss, who also happens to be a former FBI hostage negotiator and the author of the best-selling book, Never Split the Difference. Chris is a master of tactical empathy and negotiation techniques that can transform your approach to resolving conflicts and leading more effectively. I asked Chris to delve into the power of tactical empathy and how understanding the psychology behind it can give you a significant edge.
Yeah, it's a really close cousin, cognitive empathy. And, what Goleman doesn't really point out really, really well is cognitive empathy is about an accurate reading of the other side. And the reasons why sociopaths are best at it is because they don't get in their own way. They don't think about how you should feel or how you should react. I'll ask somebody, all right, so how does the other side see this? And they'll go, this is how they should see it, which means that ain't how I see it. It's how they actually see it. And your sense of right and wrong, your sense of justice, your moral compass is going to get in your way of recognizing how the other side sees it. It's a little bit like the Israeli-Palestinian thing. Each side is going to get their feelings about the injustices that they've suffered is going to get in their way of seeing how the other side actually sees it. And so it's going to color their conversation. So cognitive empathy, theoretically, a sociopath, their moral compass is not there. They got all the same emotions. They don't have guilt, and they probably don't have a moral compass, which means the stuff that gets in their way of seeing what your reaction actually is not there. They're free to make a clear read of you. And because of that, they often make extremely accurate reads. The difference between cognitive and tactical empathy is I'm going to say it out loud. Instead of me just reading you accurately, I'm going to articulate what that read is. And then it's going to be guided by what we know to be true from neuroscience, which, even though this isn't scientifically accurate, it's, an application, it's neuroscientists aren't going to disagree with me. You're 75% negative. Everybody's survival thinking is 75% negative. Now, where it rests in what organs in the brain, the amygdala. I'm listening to a fascinating conversation on Huberman right now, where the neuroscientist, psychologist he's having a conversation with is talking about how the amygdala is not all fear-centered. We look at the amygdala as being like where all our fears and our reptilian brain, our survival reactions are based. And she's saying like, yeah, that's mostly true, but not entirely. But then at the end of the day, in terms of application, she says we're still principally negative because that's how we survived. Predatory threat, what could kill you, you've got to react to it and get away from it, the caveman, right now, or you're dead. In terms of, the positive stuff, which are procreation and eating, kind of depends upon how long it's been since you've eaten. A day or two since you've eaten, you're going to want to eat before you have sex. If you got a full belly, you're probably going to want to procreate. But in any instance, if there's a saber-toothed tiger there, you don't get away right now, you're dead. We've inherited that wiring. No matter how it's composed in a brain, were mostly negative. Tactical empathy takes that into account, and we've learned what buttons to push to deactivate your negativity to put you in a much more collaborative frame of mind.
Yeah. I'm curious, like, I don't know if you've ever had this thought, but what would a world look like where everybody practices tactical empathy? Would we still have the same degree of conflict? Is it just in our nature, right, to some extent, or would that be diminished significantly?
Well, if I could wave a magic wand, imagine a world that's highly positive and highly collaborative. Everybody's borderline flow state on a regular basis, and we're creating great stuff. Another book I read recently, Walter Isaacson's book about Musk, and how he's driving people to create things that mankind has never seen. And it's burning them out. Well, everybody be doing it, and we wouldn't be getting burned out. What Tesla's done is extraordinary. What Starlink has done, what SpaceX has done. I mean, it's almost incomprehensible, the stuff that we're now taking for granted. Every car company is putting out electric vehicles now because of Musk. And when he got into the industry, every car company had given up on electric vehicles. But he takes his people and he demands beyond performance and beyond excellence, and they create extraordinary things.
Yep.
But only his company. Everybody be doing that if we could get into a highly collaborative mindset where instead of getting burned out by it, we were energized by it, and we felt better, and we couldn't get enough of it. The whole world would be doing it. It'll never happen because we're wired the way we are. We'd colonize beyond Mars by now if we were all doing that.
So I'm curious, maybe this is like somewhat of a deeper question, but what prevents people from adopting tactical empathy? Meaning that I'm sure you see in the news whether there's some war going on, and like you have to think, these aren't stupid people, right? Like at least the leaders of these organizations, there's some baseline level of intelligence, experience, and so on that they have to understand the cycle of violence, where that goes. And yet, do you ever wonder, how could you get involved and say, this is how we could resolve this, right? What prevents someone from adopting this level of tactical empathy? Is it ego? Is it other political pressures? Like, why are these things going on for years and years?
Yeah, well, first of all, have you ever seen it? Or how exposed to it have you been? Have you ever been exposed to its success and known what was the success? Like I said before, tactical empathy is astonishing. The practitioners are going to know what happened, but the people that observed it or were involved in it aren't. They're not going to have any idea that's what it was until somebody clued them in on it. This is emotional intelligence. And in many cases, at what point in time do you adopt it? I'm hearing now about some extremely successful world-renowned human beings that are aware of never split the difference and are talking about it. Now, their history is not of having been collaborative. And one person in particular has been described in very visible ways as his bite is way worse than his bark. Well, so he's got a reputation for kicking people's ass. And having gone through that now, he's like, yeah, this emotional intelligence stuff, this is what I'm into. So nobody knows that. Or what was the journey that got him there? Because he's got a history of being highly successful by being highly combative. So if you don't know, you're looking around for examples. You see this guy who's ridiculously wealthy, and you think of him as a combative guy, and you want his money. So let me emulate what I know about him publicly, when he may not be in that game at all. And I think that's one of the issues.
In episode 249, I sat down with Codie Sanchez, investor, entrepreneur, and advocate for financial freedom through business ownership. Codie is passionate about helping individuals achieve financial independence by investing in boring businesses that generate consistent cash flow. In this episode, Codie shared her insights on what makes a business investable and how law firm owners can make their practices more valuable and more resilient.
It really started actually because I have this belief, which I'm sure we're going to talk about today, that the key to all freedom is actually financial freedom. And I think that if we don't have ownership, we cannot actually be free, which is why I'm obsessed with people getting to ownership in the lowest risk way possible. I think if you right now are an employee only with only your salary, no investments, no ability for you to earn despite time tied to hours, that is hugely problematic. And so I think I saw that very early on when I was in Latin America, and I saw people who just because of how much money they made and where they came from, they had a totally different life than I do. And now, I obsess on this idea of getting people into boring businesses and getting a community of humans together who are all learning about how to get ownership, because it doesn't really matter who you work for, how much money you make. As we've seen over the last year, 279,000 jobs have been lost just in tech year to date. And so these are highly skilled people who thought that they were checking all the right boxes, and yet they lost everything. And so because of that, I think that people should own more assets, whether that's small businesses or real estate. I'm obsessed with people getting some ownership. And I think that started from seeing people who owned nothing, and thus the world exerted their will on them as opposed to the other way around.
Let's talk about that. I mean, just on the notion of financial freedom, like how would you define it? Meaning that sometimes people have a number in their mind, but obviously this varies by person. This is more about just having options, right?
Yeah. So we have a community called Contrarian Community. And inside of that, we have something called the One Sheet. And the One Sheet basically defines financial freedom monetarily. So we like every single person to go through it. And we have multiple types of income. So we have one type of income, which is your vertical income. So that's the money you make in, let's say, your salary, your 9 to 5, or being the operator of your own business. Then you have your horizontal income, and your horizontal income is not tied to time. It can be tied to skills. It can be tied to assets and decisions that you've made, but you can earn in many different verticals that aren't tied only to you individually. And then we have sort of the third realm of this, which is we track for every single individual how much time freedom they have. So, if you stopped working today, how much do you earn, and what does that compare to how much you make? And I think this is really, really important to track, because the only way to change something is to become really aware of what it is. And so definitionally for me, it's a number. Financial freedom is that you earn more than you need every single month, and you have a high degree of likelihood that you will continue to do that for the rest of the time that you will need to earn. And until you have that, I think you're just at more of a risk. And you can certainly have lifestyle inflation and all of those things, but I obsess on when people get in. I don't necessarily need every single person that comes into the group to buy a business, but I do need them to obsess on this financial freedom number, because if they do that, then I think you're a lot less easy to influence if you can be your own center of gravity from a monetary perspective.
So what about on the side of the actual business owner who's selling their business? Like what do you find are some of the reasons why they would want to sell what could be seen as a healthy business, right? That it's been around a long time, there's infrastructure in place, there's a degree of recurring revenue, cash flow is good. Why would they be interested in selling?
Yeah, why do small business owners want to sell? There's basically something called the 7 Ds. And so you have death, divorce, distress, disagreement, dullness. There's another one, it's like leaving. Let's call that like deviation. They leave their geographic area. So we call them the 7 horsemen of sales. So why would a small business owner sell? Because there's been a death in the family, because they are getting divorced, and they're being forced to divorce because they have a disagreement with their partner. And so one of them wants to sell out of it. Dull. They've been running the business for, 5-10 years. That's a long time. They're ready for something else. They have a business that they, have in California, but they want to move to Florida because they're ready to make a change. And so these are the reasons why every single day people leave businesses. In fact, if you went to any time I gave a speech, I always do this little thing where I ask people, who here owns a business? I keep your hand up. I'm like, okay. And who here would sell their business right now at the right price and the right terms? And every hand stays up. There's 2 or 3 that are probably early in their business buying journey that wouldn't sell. Almost every small business is for sale because of the thing we talked about in the beginning, which is there's some low grade stress and pain that comes with running a small business. So for the most part, until you've made tens and tens and tens and tens and tens of millions of dollars, you'll sell just about any business for the right price and terms in order to get that amount. I think once you get to Warren Buffett level, your businesses might legitimately not be for sale, but even for them, I bet at the right price they would be.
So for let's say the firm owners that are listening now, so we work with roughly 1,000 law firm owners. We coach them on their businesses. We, one of the big things that we teach them is how to make that business investable. And we say that the value of your business is inversely proportional to its dependency on you. So the more dependent it is on that individual firm owner, the less valuable it is. What can a law firm owner do to make their business more valuable and more investable?
What are you trying to do? If you're trying to sell your law firm, or you'd like to sell your law firm, you need to figure out what sellers want or what buyers want, right? And so I think the first and foremost thing is you actually need to understand the flip side. What makes somebody want to buy a business? And once you understand how to buy a business, you will infinitely increase your ability to sell a business. So some of the smartest members of our group came in because they wanted to sell a business. And what do? They learned every single step of the buyer's journey so that at the end of it, they go, okay, I now have a mindset of a buyer, and it is much easier to convince somebody of something when you speak their language and when you understand their wants. So I would say the best thing you could do is actually understand how to buy businesses if you want to sell one, because it's just the inverse. So the other thing that's interesting is if you understand what a buyer wants for a small business, you're going to see how they would negotiate with you, and you can preempt all of that. So that's the very first thing. It's the same exact thing, except inverse. You're right. We talk about the characteristics of a perfect recipe for sale business. So, we have a YouTube video on this too, but essentially for every small business, the blueprint is the same to sell it. To your point, we want to make sure the business shows as much profit and revenue as humanly possible, obviously. We want to make sure the business looks like a business, not a job, meaning everything is standardized, processized, and you could hand over a business with a series of operating procedures. And then the third component, there's lots of things underneath the three of this. The third component is how much risk is in this business. And risk might be operational risk, right? That could certainly be one, aka if Michael leaves, is this podcast done? Well, most likely, yeah. So that's a huge risk. The risk could also be managerial risk. So the layer underneath Michael doesn't have incentive aligned structure for buyouts. And so because of that, if Michael sells, they will probably leave. The risk could also be concentration of clients, right? Is it just really one big vendor that is the only sponsor for this podcast? If so, if you go to sell, somebody might not want to take on that risk. So that third layer of overarching risk, I think, is really important after standard operating procedures and maximizing for revenue and profit. But number one is really profit and revenue, because people will forgive you a lot of things if you are highly profitable. People will not forgive you anything if you lose money, but you have a ton of standard operating procedures and you have less risk because you don't have concentrated clients and you have a managerial level. So if you're trying to find the 20% that drives the 80%, it's profit.
To round out this lineup of our 300th episode spectacular, we're revisiting my conversation with Morgan Housel, a renowned financial writer and author of the best-selling book, The Psychology of Money. As you'll hear, Morgan has a unique ability to explain complex financial concepts through the lens of human behavior and psychology.
Well, I've been a financial writer for my entire career, ever since before I graduated college. And so I spent many years, a decade and a half, writing about investing and money from the behavioral standpoint. I've never been interested in what stock should you buy? Where's the economy going? When's the next market crash? I've never been interested in it. And frankly, I don't think many people can do that, make those forecasts accurately. But I thought the psychology of investing and money was so fascinating, of just what's going through your head when you're making decisions with spending money, with investing money, with saving money. That was endlessly fascinating to me. And that was something where I felt if you look throughout history, it's been the same over time. It's been stable over time. How people respond to greed and fear is the same today that it was 100 years ago. So relative to the people who are making market forecasts, and they were wrong after wrong after wrong after wrong, the people who understood the psychology of money, I think had a much better understanding of what the future held for us. And so not only was it more interesting, I think it got you closer to the truth of coming up with a philosophy for money, for how to use money as a tool to live a better life, but also for understanding how this giant machine we call the global economy works.
And in the book, you mentioned that, there's countless rich individuals who've lost everything because they felt that the millions they had were not enough, and that we shouldn't risk what we have and need for what we don't have and don't need. But, a lot of us are always shifting the goalpost, right? I see this with business leaders, probably a lot of people listening to this podcast. They dreamed of having a $1 million business. And as soon as they got to $1 million, then they said, okay, now I want a $2 million business and a $10 million business. And I'm curious as to, why many of us are constantly shifting the goalpost, and when is enough enough?
I think what's true is that there is no such thing as an objective measure of wealth. There's no such thing as once you have X dollars, then you're wealthy. That has never and will never exist, because all wealth is just relative to somebody else. It's just, what do I have relative to that guy? What do I have relative to her house? That's all it is. It's just relative to other people. So we're fortunate. It is a great thing that we live in a world that tends to, most of the time, get wealthier and more productive and better technologies, better health. That tends to be the case. Well, because of that, it automatically pushes people into have a shifting goalpost, because it's easy today to say, once I have $1 million, $10 million, whatever it is, then I'll be happy. And then you get to that level, but then you just start comparing yourself to people who have $2 million or $20 million, and you just keep going down. One extreme example of this that I used in the book are professional athletes, where the minimum wage in Major League Baseball is, I think, around $750,000. It's in that zone. That's the minimum wage for a player in the MLB. By any metric, that is wealthy. If you compare that to the rest of the nation, or certainly the rest of the world, that is like unbelievable success. You are so wealthy. I guarantee you not a single MLB player making the minimum wage feels wealthy, because they're on a team with somebody who makes $25 million a year. And there's people in the league who are making $50 million a year. It's all just relative to who is around you. And that has always been true, that you are just comparing yourself to your peers. Social media makes it 1,000,000 times more powerful and potent than it's ever been, because now you are comparing yourself not to your neighbors and your coworkers. You're comparing yourself to an algorithm that is so effective at generating FOMO and making you feel inadequate. And every time you open up Instagram, he's wealthier, she's prettier, he's happier, he's more successful. That's all it does. That's like by design what it makes you want to do. Like, what's going to get the most attention out of you is FOMO. And when you open up and say, like, someone is more beautiful than you, someone's more richer than you, someone lives in a better house than you, that's what keeps you scrolling on the device and gets your dopamine flowing. And so it's more potent today than it's ever been to be doing very well, objectively be doing very well, and feel like you're not doing very well at all. I think that is at least one of the elements that's going on today. There's a lot of different elements today. I'm not saying this is the only reason for this, but it is statistically true that the economy is very strong today. The stock market is at an all-time high. Unemployment is near a 50-year low. There's a lot of things where it's like, this is really, really good. And people do not feel it at all. And again, there's a lot of reasons for that. There's many reasons, but at least I think at least one of the reasons that's playing a part here is that we are now seeing for the first time in modern history what happens when everyone in the world is comparing themselves not to their neighbors, but to the social media algorithm. And no matter how well you're doing, how well off you are, how much your income is rising or your 401k is booming, you feel worse off, because 1,000 times a day, you open up your phone and there's someone who is doing better than you, or at least that's the appearance.
So what would you say? What's the solution? Is it just delete the social media apps and start doing meditation?
If you're capable of doing that, then sure. But I mean, I enjoy social media. I don't know if enjoy is a word. I'm maybe addicted to social media, as many people are. But I think it's what's really true. I think this is incredibly important for people to realize, is that the view that you get, not just from social media, but even before social media, it is so easy to say, wow, that person's life is amazing. They look so happy. They look so fulfilled. They're so wealthy. And 9 times out of 10, that is a false view of what's going on inside of that person's head. You almost never get to see the down parts of people's lives. People just promote the good parts of their life. They want you to see the good parts, and people tend to hide their skeletons. And it is so, so common that the person who you are looking up to and saying that person's life looks so great, they're actually dealing with a lot of shit that you don't see and that you would not want to deal with yourself. I think this tends to be very true for the most successful people in the world. The Musks, the Zuckerbergs, the Buffetts, the Gates, those kind of people. The reason they are so successful and so wealthy tends to be that they are mentally tortured. They wake up every morning and have for their entire lives saying, there's a problem that needs to be solved and I haven't solved it yet. And they're driven by a level of anxiety and whatnot. Walter Isaacson, who wrote the biography of Elon Musk, he said, quote, people who are driven by demons get shit done. And that's it. These people who are crazy productive. There's an entrepreneur named Andrew Wilkinson who summarized it. He said, a lot of people who are very successful are just walking anxiety disorders that harvested their anxiety for productivity. They were able to funnel that anxiety into productivity. The flip side of that is it's easy to look at people who are very successful. Oh, look at their house, look at their car. The reason they have that house and their car is because they are walking anxiety disorders that they have harnessed for productivity. And so I think that's one of the realizations, is that it's almost never as good as it looks for anybody. And some of the people who are truly happy, who do wake up every day with a smile, are people you not pay much attention to. They live in modest houses and just drive modest cars, but they have a great marriage. They have good relationships with their children. They're in good health. They exercise. That's what's going to make you happy. It tends not to be the things that are visible that we attach themselves to: beauty, wealth, prestige, cars, homes, clothes, that kind of thing. I think just understanding that and coming to terms with that is a big part of it.
I want to give a huge thank you to every guest who's joined me so far this year on the Game Changing Attorney podcast, and I want to thank you for listening to this podcast and for your commitment to learning and growing as a leader. If you found this episode valuable, here are 3 free ways that I can help you grow your law firm. Number 1, download the first chapter of my book absolutely free at GameChangingAttorney.com. Number 2, you can shoot me a text at 404-531-7691, and I'll answer any question that you've got for me. And finally, number 3, if you can leave this podcast a 5-star review, it'll help us gain access to more influential thought leaders and bring their lessons learned here to you. For more information on this episode, see the show notes in your podcast app or visit legalpodcast.com.